When it comes to motorcycle touring, one of the biggest questions you're probably going to face is whether you want to travel alone or in a group. Now, both come with a different and unique experience, pros and cons, and it isn't always clear, but let's take a little look at them now, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll decide what you really want to do. This one was completely my fault. Let's talk about solo motorcycle traveling, my favorite. Now, solo motorcycle traveling means complete freedom. And what does complete freedom mean? It means complete freedom over absolutely everything. When you stop, when you start, when you need a pee break, when you want to have lunch, where you go, where you don't go, the route you're going to follow. Absolutely everything is your decision. You don't need to accommodate anyone else but your own selfish needs. I love it. Of course, there's other benefits too, obviously, and that being personal growth. You guys have seen me go from tearful princess to absolute boss bitch over the last few years. I have had my ups, my downs. I've had my cryings. I've had my meltdowns. I've had my personal achievements in a whole different variety of ways. And you know what has been consistent throughout all of that? Personal growth. When I look at some of my content from my first few months of YouTube, I was such an awkward turtle. I had no confidence in myself, in my abilities, and in any aspect of my life. I say this time and time again, motorcycle traveling, especially traveling alone, makes the amount of self-growth that you experience astronomical. Go back and look at some of my earlier videos. I was such an introverted, awkward turtle who barely ever spoke. And I was like that both inside YouTube and outside of YouTube. I never had any confidence in myself. I always second-guessed myself. I was a continuous little wet drip. It was the case. I could never commit to decisions. I always sat on the fence. I always wanted to people please, and traveling alone and basically putting myself in situations where I had to forcibly learn that I could do things for myself completely changed my mindset 10 times. I went back to school, I got my master's degree, I started going for a career that I really wanted to do, and there was continuous setbacks in all of those things. Things like resits, and at the time it didn't feel like I could do that. And then a year into motorcycling, I was like, you know what? If I can pick myself up off the floor in tears and forcibly ride an extra 200 miles in the rain, you know what? I can go sit that exam about corporate finance, because they're equally as hard, they're equally as horrific, and I've proven I can do this, so I know I can do that. And even though they weren't directly transferable, it made me believe in myself, and it taught me that all I really need to do is think that I can do it and commit to the decision, and it will get done. So yeah, self-growth, amazing. Now, the other benefit to solo motorcycle touring is, of course, solitude and self-reflection. I was definitely the kind of person who never really liked their own company before I started motorcycle touring. I always had people living with me. I'd never lived alone. I never really traveled alone. I'd always traveled with friends or family. And I grew up with a lot of sisters. I have 4 sisters. So the concept of being alone was not a concept that I was familiar with. And spending time by myself always historically used to make me feel really uncomfortable. And I think part of that is most people don't really want to self-reflect. It's not a comfortable process to constantly think about who you are as a person, your historic actions, and try to consider that you may not be the best possible version of yourself. And motorcycle touring really kind of gave me that vessel to have that self-reflection time, to have that kind of self-growth, I suppose. It really taught me to sit down and think, because at the end of the day, when you're lying in a tent in the middle of the forest and you don't really have anywhere to go, and you're trying to conserve your batteries and your electronics, you end up in a situation where you put down all of those distractions that prevent us from reflecting on who we are as a person. And at the end of the day, you are left with yourself and only yourself. and you think. That's just what happens. And every time you do that process, you become a little bit stronger, a little bit wiser, and you really start to enjoy your own company, and you really become confident with enjoying your own company. And I've come to realize that that is a skill that you have to learn as a person, and it's a skill that so few people have and obtain in their life. But being able to enjoy yourself as a person and enjoy your own company without the need of input from devices or social media or even other people is such a absolutely inspirational, world-opening thing to have in your life. And it's definitely the thing that I love the most, is having that me time and not feeling like I need to fill the space with noise, and getting and sitting and reflecting on my life and really thinking and having that deep thoughts and deep conversations with myself about what I want to do. You don't get that with group rides. You get kind of like a party atmosphere of group rides, but solitude with solo riding really changes your perspective on life. It's really worth doing. It doesn't happen straight away. I think for me, it didn't really start happening fully until maybe 8, 9, even 10 months into the journey. The more I started to travel, the more time I spent on the road, the more I started to have those moments where I would sit and think about who I was, what I'd done, who I want to be and where I want to go. And it's a really important skill. So yeah, you don't get that in a group ride. Now, the other benefit to solo motorcycle traveling is, of course, the flexibility of planning. There's been so many times where I've gone to set off on the road and the weather has been naff, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna delay it by a few days. However, when you bring more people into the mix, you don't really get that opportunity to do that, because a lot of people have to book time off work. They have to arrange their lives to kind of accommodate everyone. And so whether it's rainy or rubbish, most people can't really change that. If they've booked annual leave, they've booked annual leave. They don't really want to set off a few days later. Equally, you might get to a particular area and have a set route that the group is going to go down, and it might be horrific weather by the time you get that. You might not want to be there. You might want to take a completely different route. Changing a route last minute when you're in a big group is like a mission impossible. Maybe if you're 1 or 2 people, maybe 3, it's a bit easier. But often with group rides, more often than not, people want to stay in hotels. Hotels require booking. It's very rare to see a huge group ride that involves tents and campsites without pre-booking, because large groups mean you need the availability at a campsite, you need to book ahead, and changing a route last minute isn't happening. But with solo riding, you get that flexibility to do what you want to do. Now, I'm not saying that solo motorcycle traveling is the greatest thing in the world, because it's not. Sometimes it just really sucks. And one of the main ways that it does suck is that life on the road, when you're by yourself, yes, you get that reflection time, but also, oh my God, it can be so lonely. I've gone 10, 11, even 12 days without physically interacting with someone other than the petrol station attendant to just tap my card. And that can be really lonely sometimes. It can be a bit of a mental battle, not being able to talk with someone, and before you know it, you're talking to the sheep on the road and the squirrels in the trees. So yeah, it gets really lonely. The other aspect is safety concerns. When you travel by yourself, I definitely feel like this isn't talked about enough in motorcycle traveling. I don't know what it's like for men, but as a solo female traveler, you spend a large percentage of your time when you're camping, specifically wild camping, feeling scared. I never feel brave. I do kind of do that wild camping, and I obviously do stay in places like forests and stuff. I am afraid the whole night through. I am so scared, and the tiniest noise will wake me up in the middle of the night, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna get murdered today. Is today the day that my coffin gets built, We don't talk about this enough, but it's really scary traveling by yourself and being that vulnerable. And I take all the precautions of the world. I always, check out an environment, see and try and read what's going on. And, you can only do so much. A lot of it is risky. and taking risks. But yeah, you definitely experience that fear. It's not a bad thing in itself. It keeps you alive, but it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable emotion, and it can suck sometimes, and you feel less afraid when you're with someone else. The other downside, again, is another safety concern, which is if you have an accident out on the road and you're alone, the time it takes for emergency services to get to you is going to be significantly higher if you don't have someone there to phone for you. If you're unconscious on the floor, it's going to be a little bit longer. Now, obviously there's steps you can take, like you can use the safety devices, you can have someone that tracks you. I have somebody at home who keeps a tablet on their desk and they can see where I am at all times. And it basically operates like a dead man's handle. But even then, I feel like it would be an hour or so before I got that call to see if I'm okay, because naturally I always stop off in locations to explore and film, and so it would very much be the case that if I came off, yes, help would come eventually, but if somebody was with me, they would ring straight away and the ambulance would come straight away. But it doesn't happen as quickly when you're riding alone. The last downside of traveling by yourself is fatigue and also support. So one of the issues you get is that every day when you're traveling by yourself, you have a lot of decisions to make, and I call this decision fatigue. So this can include where you're going to stay, what you're going to eat, where you're going to go, the route you're going to take. When you ride in a group, you can dish out this responsibility and you can take it in turns. So one person will lead someone every day, one person might choose where they're going to stay, what they're going to eat. And this kind of gives you a mental rest just to kind of like follow the group a little bit. But also in terms of things like breaking down, repairing a bike, you have support around you to get this done quickly. It feels more attainable, easier to do. You feel more empowered to get that done when you do have support around you to help you get that done. And you don't get that with solo riding. It just doesn't happen. You are by yourself, and yes, you get the resilience, but sometimes support is nice too, you know? So yeah, that's the other downside. Now for me, there are 4 main downsides to riding in a group. And again, I've already touched on 2 of them before, which is you have less flexibility and you have to compromise a lot more. But there are also 2 other major downsides that I think. The third major downside to riding in a group is conflict. Conflict happens in groups. It is human nature. People come from all walks of life. People have a whole variety of different opinions, and sometimes those opinions clash. We are all very unique human beings, and we are not always going to get on. And sometimes the stress of riding long hours, maybe the lack of food, the increased heat, people feel a little bit more jaded and are more inclined to act impulsively and sometimes aggressively, and sometimes people just don't see eye to eye, and that creates conflict. And when conflict happens, it's so awkward. It is so awkward, because you're just sit there like, I want to go home. So yeah, that's one of the main downsides, is with a group comes arguments. Human nature, unavoidable, it happens. Just, you have to find a way to deal with it. And sometimes it can ruin a trip, and that's something you don't really have control over. The last downside to riding in a group is that you will inevitably have longer breaks. More people means more personal needs, and you will have more frequent breaks. You can only ever ride as far as the weakest bladder in your group. If somebody needs to go to the loo every hour, you're going to be stopping every hour. You can't leave them at the petrol station. Believe me, I've tried, I haven't tried. But that's what happens. You can only ever ride as far as the weakest person in your group. And people do tend to take longer because, again, they're socializing. People don't really talk on the bike, so the socializing happens off the bike. Not necessarily a bad thing, because that tends to be when funny stuff happens, but it does happen. You do spend less time on the road and more time chit-chatting at petrol stations. So there you go. When it comes to motorcycle touring, whether you decide to ride solo or in a group, they both offer unique experiences. Riding solo definitely makes you grow as a person. It makes you more self-reliant, self-resilient, and it makes you a little bit selfish in a good kind of way. Alternatively, riding in a group means that you get to have that shared experience with somebody. You get to kind of enjoy something that you really love equally with people who also really love it. And you get all those funny moments, and it's a good party on the road. I think that's a good way to put it. Whichever way you want to do, it's entirely down to you as a person. I think it's always good to do both. Both is good. You'll naturally have a preference for one or the other. My preference is for riding solo, but equally I really do enjoy riding with other people. So I'm probably going to do more of that in the future. I hope that this content has been incredibly useful and given you some food for thought or fuel for your bike mentally. In the meantime, if you guys do want to see more great bike content, don't forget to hit subscribe. In the meantime, ride safe, stay crazy, and I'll see you next week. My name's Sophie Sprocket, signing off. Bye. This one was completely my fault.